Today we have a really interesting program. I'm Paul Feiner, the Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and my guest is Tom Bouyer. And Tom is a real hero in our community. In fact, I was not aware until a few days ago of the impact you made on the civil rights movement. Because people like you, who made it possible for President Obama, former Vice President Kamala Harris, Supreme Court justices, to achieve prominent places in America. Tom is one of the survivors of the Alabama sit-in. He showed courage, he showed leadership, he risked his life so we could change history. So Tom, thank you so much for being a guest.
Well, thank you, Paul, for having me. This time of year especially is very important to me because within the last 30 days or so, we celebrated the birthday of one of our most prominent civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King. And now we celebrate Black History Month, all those who made achievements, especially during the month of February. So it's a privilege and an honor to be with you to share with you some of my experiences as a civil rights youth activist growing up in and around the Birmingham and Bessemer, Alabama area.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit about the Alabama sit-in?
Yes. It was a very hot day in July of 1964. Not long before that, I believe it was July 2nd, was when the Civil Rights Act had been passed. And we as young men, young boys especially, we hung out at a local business which was owned by my father, a shoe shine parlor. We hung out there and we discussed not only current event, but other things that boys do. But current events was very popular at that time because of the climate that we were living in. The Civil Rights Act had been passed. We thought we had newfound freedom. But much to our surprise, that was met with a tremendous amount of violence. We decided to go to lunch counters. We decided to try and ride in the front of the bus rather than going to the back of the bus like we had been told to do for years. We decided to take advantage of this, what we thought was newfound freedom once the Civil Rights Act had been passed. So therefore, we got out there and went to department stores, sat down at lunch counters, tried to go to swimming pools. But unfortunately, all of these things that we did, they were met with violence.
When you say violence, what?
Violence in terms of dogs and water hose that the police had and used on us. Bull Connor was the police commissioner at the time there in Birmingham, and he used the tactics of the firemen using water hose, policemen using dogs. And of course, there were already signs up at water fountains and various other places that said white only. So we had grown accustomed to this, but at the same time, we'd also grown tired of it. So we decided at that point that we would take a stand. And shortly after the Civil Rights Act had been passed, 8, 9, 10 of us, friends of mine, we decided to test this newfound freedom at a lunch counter here in Bessemer, Alabama, rather than going over to Birmingham. This was a place where our families had shopped, spent their little hard-earned money, and we had spent some of our money at this particular store. The store was called McClellan's department store. We called them 5 and dime stores at the time. So we decided to go there and see if we would be allowed to eat at the lunch counter. As we were going in, we noticed several men outside congregating together, and they had bags with handles sticking out of them that looked like baseball bats. Well, we didn't think that they were going to attack us or anything, so we proceeded to go into the store and take a seat at the lunch counter. And after being there for a few minutes, the waitress said to us, "Now, you know you all are not supposed to be here." and you can't be served. So we refused to leave. We sat there, and after a few minutes of sitting there, we noticed some men coming from the front door with these bags, and all of a sudden, they take out baseball bats. They come up behind us and just started beating us. And as soon as we, found out that they were attacking us, we did our best to defend ourselves, fighting back, grabbing pieces of furniture in the store, trying to stop them from attacking us. But they proceeded to beat us. I myself was beaten very badly over the head and back, and so on and so forth. We all got out except for one friend, Eddie Harris. Eddie, we found out later, once we got back to the place where we started, that was my father's shoe shine stand, you realize that Eddie was missing. Said, oh my God, where's Eddie? We find out later that he was trapped in a corner, and instead of letting him get out, they proceeded to beat him unmercifully. It was incredible. They had almost broke every bone in his body. Wow. He later eventually died as a result of his injuries. But
how long did he live after?
Not very long. I would say maybe a year, if that, but certainly he didn't live very long after that. But we didn't find this out until later because we were wondering, where was Eddie? Where's Eddie? And we find out that he had been hospitalized. When they took us if you went to a hospital in that part of Alabama at the time, they took you into the basement. You could not be on the floor where the other patients were. That was white only. Again, part of the segregation.
Did they give black people who were sick the same level of care, or not really?
No, not at all. In fact, I myself had never even seen the inside of a hospital until I became grown. In 1966, after my graduation, I left there and came to New York to live because I said to my grandmother and my parents, I really don't want to live here because I don't think that I would live very long if I stay here. We and several of my friends had become rebelling against the violence and the lifestyle that was going on. We decided, and I personally decided, that I wanted to come north to find out if life was better. And I was fortunate because a relative of mine who owned a funeral home in White Plains, Joseph Bouyer, allowed me to come and stay with him. That was in 1966. But looking back on that particular sit-in, it was sort of swept under the rug for years. We were told, we received visits from the FBI when we thought, why are we being investigated? Are they blaming us for this? But we were investigated by, or paid a visit to by the FBI and questioned as to what happened that day. And we were told that it was being looked into. Lo and behold, it was swept under the rug. Nothing happened and nothing was done.
And it's sort of interesting because when you said the police were as horrible as the Ku Klux Klan.
They were. They really were. And at that time, Birmingham had one of the most lethal, one of the worst clans of the Ku Klux Klan living chapters in that area, the Birmingham-Bessemer area. So there was always, if not a lynching, a bombing. In fact, one of the men that was accused of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, on the second day of his trial, his niece even said that he had enough ammunition or dynamite to blow up half of Birmingham, Alabama, to level it, okay? Birmingham was later renamed among people that lived there as Bombingham as opposed to Birmingham because there were so many bombings. Martin Luther King's brother's home was bombed, okay? But, we fought back nonviolently, and that was because of the tactics that Fred Shuttlesworth, Martin Luther King, and all of them, Ralph Abernathy, they preached nonviolence. So, and that's what we tried to do.
So Were there similar situations all over the country? For example, when you were involved
Yes.
in the sit-in, was it sort of something happening all over the Deep South, or was
All
this
throughout the South. The bombings, the segregation, things had erupted because the Civil Rights Act had been passed. And of course, they did not want us to integrate the lunch counters, the schools, the parks. They didn't want any of us using these facilities. So as a result of this, we continued all throughout the South, not just in Birmingham. Birmingham just happened to be one of the major hubs because this is where Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy and Fred Shuttlesworth, they all would meet there at the A.G. Gaston Motel, and they would instruct us on how to protest, how to sit in, and how to be nonviolent. But the young people, those of us who went out, and we did so, I might add, without our parents knowing it. Because at the time, if our parents knew that we were going out there to protest and demonstrate, a lot of them would not let us do it because their jobs may have been taken by the white people in that area, the white judicial system. So as a result of that,
right? So they would discriminate. So if they knew that you were involved, then one way of getting back would be to fire your parents.
Fire your parents or take your father's job away. So that's why we took it upon ourselves to do this secretly, especially this particular sit-in, because things were hot at the time. Demonstrations, sit-ins, marches were erupting all throughout the South. It just so happened that Birmingham, because King was there, because he was jailed there, and it was interesting because he was jailed and not allowed to contact his wife over in Atlanta, let her know that he had been jailed. And the letters from the Birmingham jail was written on the edges of a newspaper. And if you get some time, I would advise anyone to read letters from the Birmingham jail. And he wrote the letters primarily because there were several clergymen in the area who had written an article or published an article in the local paper saying that the demonstrations and protests should not take place, that the black people should stop doing what they're doing. And Martin Luther King wrote a rebuttal or a letter in reference to their comments, what they were saying. So that's how the Birmingham letters got started, from the Birmingham jail.
Another question that I have is, after this incident, did you stay involved in the civil rights movement, or were you shaken up and said, I don't want to...
Paul, I was shaken up. I'll be very honest with you. This was one of the most traumatic experiences in my lifetime. I'd never been hit and beaten like that. I mean, my skull was... Since that time, I have had 3 brain operations, okay? And a lot of it was a result of my being in Vietnam, being exposed to Agent Orange and all of that, because 1 year after I graduated, I left and was shipped off to Vietnam. But prior to that, I wanted to get out of Alabama as quick as possible.
Let me ask a question. Since you were a veteran and in Vietnam, was there discrimination in the military when you were in Vietnam?
Absolutely. Not so much when we were out on the battlefield actually in action, but there were those who were from the South, whites, who did not want to be in a barracks next to a black person, but at the time they had no choice. I mean, after all, we were all in the war together. So, there was not as much segregation as there was in the South when we were growing up.
So was it more that they would be a little civil, but not overtly very friendly?
They would be a little civil, but again, not overtly friendly or anything like that. And I actually got to know had several white friends while I was in the service. And I'll give you one example of, not all of them were racist or anything like that. I remember several years ago, my wife and I, at one time, I would go to Washington, D.C. to visit the wall, the Vietnam Veterans Wall. And I would go with my wife, and she would stand off to the side, and I would go up by myself to read some of the names on the wall. And it became very emotional for me. And I'm standing there, and this gentleman walks up behind me, and he says, "You were there?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Welcome home, brother. God bless you." He gave me a coin, which I keep at home and will keep forever. We both stood there hugging. He was white, and we stood there hugging and saying to one another, "We're so glad you made it home. We're so glad you made it home." And I did meet several people like him in the service. But yes, there was some racism.
You know, one of the things that I find interesting is that you're so modest, but you were also featured on an NBC national news story. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I was actually on the golf course up in Croton, not Croton on the Hudson, but Ossining, Hudson Hills Golf Course. I'm an avid golfer, and I'm on the golf course, very first hole, standing there with three guys, and one of them was a friend of mine, and he was white. I got to meet him because we were up there playing one day, and they asked me, "Tom, would you mind going out with this guy?" I said, "No, not at all." His name was Larry. So we get to the first tee, and I get a phone call. And I don't answer my phone on the golf course, but something told me to answer it that day. I answered my phone, and the gentleman on the phone said, "Tom Bouyer?" I said, "Yes." He said, "John Sharp, NBC News." I said, "NBC News? What can I do for you, John?" He says, "Well, I understand that you were part of the McClellan's sit-in there in Bessemer, Alabama, a suburb of Birmingham. And for the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act being passed, we would like to do a piece and interview each and every one of you that's still alive. And I would like to interview you. Is that possible?" And at the time, my wife was the only person in the state of New York, not even our daughter, who's a teacher right here at, I believe the school is Bailey down the street.
Right.
She didn't even know about it. So after I said to John, I said, "John, I got to think this over and let me get back to you." He said, "Please do, by all means." After a few days, I thought about it, and I'll be honest with you, I prayed about it because this is something that I sometimes still get very emotional about. That beating, that particular incident is still fresh in my memory, what happened. So after a couple of weeks, a week or so, I called John back and I said, "Let's do it." Because something said to me, a lot of this stuff that we're talking about they're going to interview me about, it's not in the school books. And a lot of these kids don't know about it and will never know about it because it's being erased out of the school books and it's not being taught. So with that said, I agreed to do the interview, and next thing I know, he says, "Well, let's get a date together." They sent a truck up to my house at Saratoga Road, there, 17 Saratoga Road, and they said, "Let's do the interview inside, if you don't mind, rather than outside." I said, "Sure, by all means." And we decided to do it inside my house, and I sat there at the counter with the cameras, and they proceeded to do the interview. But
Because it's almost like impossible for somebody at the Bailey School now to really appreciate what segregation was like, and it's relatively recently. You know, I'm looking at this scrapbook that you gave me, and you know, I just noticed there was one something. It said, "No dogs, Negroes, Mexicans, colored, served in rear. Restrooms white only. Drinking fountain, white and colored." But to compare a Negro to a dog,
yeah, and that's basically what they did.
They basically treated, you know, you weren't a human.
No, that's basically what they did. They treated us that way, and we got to the point where we started to rebel against that, my young friends and I. So that's why we met that morning, a hot day in July 7th, 1964, we decided very secretly among ourselves that we were going to integrate this particular lunch counter.
And you said that the place where the lunch counter was, you went shopping there. It was just that, so the blacks and whites could shop, but they couldn't eat.
We could not eat at the lunch counter
Right.
that they had there.
So you were giving them money over the years, and your family was giving them money.
Oh, yes.
So that was sort of interesting. When people were shopping, let's say you were buying a shirt. Mm-hmm. Would there be a white person right next to you looking at the shirt, or was it segregated also?
Well, it was segregated. How it worked was you could buy that shirt, but if there was a white person standing around ready to go to the register to get checked out or whatever, you could be standing in the rear, or up front rather, and they would call the white person up to take their sale first as opposed to yours. And I might add, this particular store, McClellan's, it still, as of last year, it still existed, and there's a plaque on the door which says historic events took place here. But it mentions nothing about, the involvement, so on and so forth, on the front door and on the side door. So I decided to take my family down last year in January because they were all born and raised right here in White Plains. And I'm here to tell you, my granddaughter and grandson that attended Hackley, granddaughter's, she's now second year at UConn, but they both attend Hackley, and they were in shock. And once again, I became very emotional because of that beating. Until this day, I think about it sometimes because I said, how can anyone treat anyone like that, not even an animal, to be beaten with baseball bats until you're bloody? I mean, there was blood all over the place. Store racks turned over. I mean, this place was wrecked to the point where they had to close it.
And do you sort of feel in some ways that it's people like you who created a foundation that led to, African Americans and blacks being treated, better?
Well, yes. Much has changed since 1964. When I went home last year, I noticed there was a restaurant across the street that we were never allowed to go into unless we worked there, as washing dishes or cleaning the floor or something like that. I noticed blacks and white going in and out of that restaurant, which is right around the corner from where this sit-in took place. And I said, wow, things have changed a little bit. And also to see a black person walking side by side down the street there. When we were coming along, if a white person was walking towards you, you had to step aside on the sidewalk and let them go by. And that really hurt. I'll tell you another incident. I remember going home several years after that, because my mom was still alive at the time, and she took me shopping downtown Bessemer. Well, I was an adult at this time, had been to Vietnam, finished college and everything. And as we were walking towards this white couple on the sidewalk, my mom stepped aside to let them go by. And I just closed my eyes because even that was something that hurt, and this had to be 40 some years later. It was still going on.
Now, you've lived in Greenburgh for how many years?
I've been in Greenburgh, I've been married now 54 years. So I've been in Greenburgh probably 53 years.
And let me ask about your experiences in Greenburgh. You came from the Deep South, and now you moved to New York. New York was not everybody thinks, New York was always progressive,
Yeah.
but it wasn't always. Did you experience discrimination in New York?
Very little. But yes, there were certain incidents where I experienced some racism. Even to this day, it's not as much as it used to be. We've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of work to be done. But moving from the Deep South where I grew up to New York was probably one of the best things that I could have done for my lifetime, because I was able to go to school. But when I got here, I found out that black and white kids were going to school together. My wife, right, who went to White Plains High School, she went to school with several white individuals, okay? We were not allowed to do that in Alabama. The schools were segregated. But Greenburgh, New York in general, I was in shock to see how things were being run, how things were being done. Black and white people talking, having conversation together. Now, yes, there is some pockets of racism that still exist here in New York, everywhere, but it was nothing like what I grew up with in the state of Alabama.
I just think it's so fascinating, and I really feel you're a hero because what you did created a foundation that made it possible for more progress to be made. I remember I interviewed somebody on a radio station program that I had years ago, and the woman, a Hartsdale resident, was the first woman to integrate the Ardsley schools.
Okay.
She took in a young man who was one of these step program, and she said people were like spitting on their drive, on her lawn. And finally, the community accepted of this, and this was like in the '60s, so it's relatively recently. And when he graduated, they wouldn't let him go swimming, and because he was black. And I'll never forget that that story. But Greenburgh also, the neighborhood that you live, is a neighborhood where Roy Campanella.
Yes.
We had Vernon Jordan, Greenburgh, Cab Calloway, Gordon Parks. So this community has always welcomed the African American community, but there's other municipalities in Westchester that
they're not so friendly. They don't. They're not as open and segregated as Greenburgh is. I was very shocked and surprised. My uncle, as I said, who was a mortician in White Plains, when he told me all the individuals like Roy Campanella, Moms Mabley, Vernon, all these individuals that existed in this town, Greenburgh, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is where I want to live.
This is really a historic community.
It is.
We're running out of time. I just want to say I'm so honored to meet you. This is one of the highlights of my career, just talking to you, because I feel that it's so interesting. And I really admire somebody who had the courage to speak out and fight for something that you believed in. This is what's needed in the world.
Yes, and we did what we thought was right at the time. 16, 15 years old, you don't really know what you want to do in terms of your whole life. But at that time, we were tired of being called the N-word or being called boy or being told we had to go to the back of the bus. So we decided amongst ourselves to take a stand. And this was right after the Civil Rights Act had been passed.
This is so great. Thank you so much.